So you want to write a story in first person. Well, it poses a few challenges. First of all, we're with the main character the entire story, so that means the audience has to be willing to go on the adventure with them. Secondly, first person can make it difficult to relay information to the audience. We either have to learn alongside the main character or find a way to relay that information to the audience. So how do we overcome these challenges? Well, step one to writing any perspective is to read that POV. And I don't mean just like a few pages, I mean entire novels, ideally. But for first person specifically, there are two concepts I want you to think about and watch for as you're reading and before you start writing. Likeability and exposition. How do you craft a character for first person, and how do you reveal information to the audience? When people talk about first person, they often say the main character needs to be likable. What does that even mean? Likeable is profoundly subjective. So how do you make a character that's likable when everyone has different tastes? As with all things writing related, it's multifaceted and often comes down to your target audience. But let's explore some ways we might make a character likable. When we talk about character likability, it's not in the same way you would call your best friend likable. It's about how the character connects to the audience. A character can be detestable by personal standards, but they might still be likable by fiction standards. Let's look at an example real quick. It's not from a book, but the concept still stands. Or at least I'm saying that it does because it has a lot of first-person monologues. Everyone loves Ferris Bueller.
You're right. It's fact.
He's charismatic, smart, funny, stands up to authority. The list goes on. But if you consider having him as a real-life friend, I'd wager you'd feel different. He's dishonest, a thief, manipulative, and self-obsessed. Every action he takes is motivated by what he wants. And when the people around him disagree, he gaslights them into thinking otherwise. I would not want to be friends with Ferris Bueller, but I do like him as a character. Why? Well, let's look at a few different ways the audience can connect to a character. Morality, fascination, and emotion, all of which are subjective. On a moral level, like I said, Ferris is no good for me. But what about the others? Ferris is a spectacle. He pulls off feats of trickery that are a blast to watch. He's all those things I said at the beginning, fun, witty, larger than life. And regardless of his poor morals, we're fascinated by him. That can invest the audience in the character. We like watching him go, so we excuse the things that we don't like. But sheer entertainment value alone usually isn't enough to carry a main character. We need something deeper. We need emotion. This is easily the broadest category. There are tons of ways to connect with people on an emotional level, and a big one for Ferris is wish fulfillment. I'd wager at some point in time, we've all dreamed of ditching obligations, making a fool out of an oppressive authority figure, being the center of attention, driving a sweet car, having an attractive significant other. Even if you don't connect with all of Ferris's accomplishments, they are incredibly broad, so a lot of people can live vicariously through him. We see parts of ourselves in Ferris. Ferris's broad appeal makes him a fantastic character for a general audience. But the emotional aspects of characters aren't just additive. Sometimes they can limit your audience. Imagine that list of traits from before, but with a scummy rich dude.
I got broads in Atlanta.
Not so broadly appealing now, right? That will still work for some people, but the context of a character can change everything. Think about who Ferris is on an archetypal level. He has baseball stuff, but he's not a jock. He's smart and understands technology, but he's not a nerd. He doesn't really fit into any clique. He's just a likable guy. If he had been a jock, then that might have made his character less accessible to nerds and vice versa. But instead, he embodies elements of both without being either. I'm not saying that characters have to be this broad. That can make them boring. But But Ferris is just a fascinating example of a character that was constructed to be as likable and non-exclusionary as possible. Now, let's compare that to a different example, Hazel Grace from The Fault in Our Stars. Morally, Hazel doesn't lean one way or the other, since the story doesn't really put her in any morally compromising situations. So while she doesn't get any bonus points here, she also doesn't lose any. From a fascination standpoint, Hazel also doesn't stick out a lot. She's not dull, but she isn't doing anything particularly interesting compared to Ferris Bueller upping the cool factor every 5 minutes.
I got broads in Atlanta.
In fact, part of the story is Hazel starting as reserved and learning to express herself and be more adventurous. So for a good chunk of the story, she's not supposed to be interesting. That's not a bad thing. Characters don't have to be drenched in spectacle to be good. Where Hazel excels, though, is emotion. First off, she has cancer. Illness is one of the binding ordeals of humanity. We all get sick. We all know people who've died of illness, some before their time. So Hazel's ailment immediately makes us empathetic, and seeing her fight makes us want to cheer her on. Hazel goes farther than that, though. She is a teenage girl and a bookworm. The Fault in Our Stars is YA. And guess what is the audience for that? Generally, bookwormish teenage girls. Immediately, the audience the book was written for will connect emotionally with Hazel. Bookworm YA protagonists are so popular to the point where it's almost a meme. But that's because it matches the audience. Yeah, it's probably a bit tired at this point. But if you're gonna have a character tell the story, who better than someone the audience sees themselves in? This is why I think it's pretty silly when older dudes hate on YA. It wasn't written for you. Why would you like something you couldn't even hope to relate with? We know you don't like it. We knew before you even said it. Why say something so obvious? Just shh. Like the books you like. Why hate on something? Why? There's no reason to. It's silly. So while Hazel might not be a perfect character for a general audience, she's fantastic for her target audience since she relates to them on such an intimate level. When it comes down to making a likable character, they don't have to be some shining example of a perfect person. That can be boring. Think about what connects the reader to your character, whether it be a moral bond, fascination, or emotion. You can go for broad appeal, or you can hone in on a target audience. Though a blend of both is usually best, since books generally aren't trying to hit a super wide audience like a blockbuster movie. Now, let's talk about how you relay important story information to the audience, which is usually more of an issue for sci-fi fantasy. If you're writing something realistic, there's usually less to explain. The dilemma with first person is you either have a character who needs to learn about the world, or you have a character who already knows about the world, but you need to relay that information to the audience. The first is a bit simpler since the audience can learn along with the character, often through a mentor of some kind. Man, this world is so fantastic and confusing. I sure wish I had some help.
I will teach you everything I know.
Thanks. The whole mentor thing can feel played out, but the character will eventually ask questions and learn what they need to as they go. Although this can be kind of constricting. What if you don't want your character to be inexperienced at the start of a story? Not every story begins with a character who has never heard about magic, or owlbears, or dragons, or big cat things, and cat buses, and whatever this is. That's where you get the other half of the dilemma. The character already knows things the audience needs to learn, which the solution to may seem obvious. The character's telling the story so they can just tell the audience what they need to know. No.
It's false. No way. Not this time.
Infodumps like that can come across as amateurish. They require you spend a lot of time in the character's head, often explaining something right before it happens, which means the story isn't progressing. That can be boring and hurt your pacing. Information should come up naturally. Like in our previous example, it makes sense that a mentor would explain things. It doesn't feel out of place. So one way you can accomplish this is to switch the roles. Your perspective character is the mentor.
I will teach this child everything I know. I will teach you everything I know.
Thanks. But that still puts pressure on your story since you have to include a character you might not have otherwise. Basically, no matter what, you're probably gonna have to make plot concessions to properly weave in exposition. But there are a few ways that don't require you to have an entire character dedicated to it. For example, if you're trying to show off a magic system or advanced technology, towards the beginning of the story, have a scene with the main character training or having to use magic for something mundane. That can communicate details without having to declare them outright. You can show some things and then insert smaller details in narration to create the full picture. Man, training really took it out of me. I need to go ponder the orb and recharge. Orb. Apart from training scenes, you can have low-stake conflicts where something like magic or fighting skill becomes relevant. If you need to convey world-building details, it can come up naturally in conversation. People talk about current events and the world around them all the time. Just avoid the character spilling out information in narration.
Concerning hobbits. In the Shire lives the hobbits. They are little rascally guys, always getting into trouble and eating and drinking beer, but not beer in pints, in smaller cups, because pints are too big for them, and they're just rascally little guys all the time. Are you listening?
No, I'm not. Who would be? There are plenty of ways to weave exposition into your story, and they aren't exclusive to first person, but first person just happens to be particularly fraught with ways to do it poorly. And it's hard to make the decision on what's too much or too little exposition in your own work. You know everything, so no matter what, it'll make sense to you. Ideally, you have someone else read your story, then give you notes to fix while editing. But to avoid large structural edits, like including a whole new character, it's nice to have a plan before you go in. Think about the characters in your story. Can one be a mentor, maybe a mentee? What does your character already know? And how can you construct the plot to weave in exposition? And like I said in the beginning, don't forget to read books in first person. Pay attention to their characterization and how they handle exposition. Then soon, you'll be an expert at writing first person. Probably. It'll still take time and practice. But then, expert. Thanks for watching.